We all know Rome, the roads, the Colosseum, the empire that ruled the world for centuries. But here is the part most people never talk about. A city of 1 million people where a man could be put on a public kill list, and any stranger who murdered him would be paid by the government. Where an emperor watched people burn alive in his garden at night and called it a dinner party. Where 6,000 men were crucified along a single road and left there for months, not as punishment, but as a message. These were not accidents. These were not moments of madness. By the end of this video, you will understand something about Rome that most people never learn. That its greatest achievement and its greatest horror were the same thing. The Spartacus Slave Revolt and its aftermath. At the height of the Roman Republic, 1 in every 3 people in Italy was enslaved. They built the roads, worked the farms, died in the arenas. Their legal status was not person, it was property. In 73 BC, a Thracian gladiator named Spartacus escaped a training school in Capua with 70 men armed with kitchen equipment. Within a year, 120,000 enslaved people had joined him. The Senate, which had treated the revolt as a policing problem, began to understand it was something else entirely. Spartacus defeated multiple Roman armies. He defeated a praetor. He defeated 2 consuls. For 2 years, escaped slaves held the most powerful military force in the ancient world at a standstill. The Senate gave command to Marcus Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome. He built a 37-mile wall across the toe of Italy, trapping Spartacus in Calabria. He reintroduced decimation, every 10th man in cowardly units beaten to death by the other 9. Crassus wanted his soldiers to fear him more than they feared Spartacus. In 71 BC, the revolt was crushed. Spartacus died in battle. His body was never recovered. 6,000 survivors were crucified along the Appian Way, 130 miles, 6,000 crosses, left for months. No one was permitted to take the bodies down. Roman slavery continued entirely unchanged. Rome's answer was not reform. It was to make the cost of resistance so visible and so permanent that the thought itself became unbearable. The proscriptions of Sulla. In 82 BC, Rome was governed by lists. Any Roman whose name appeared was declared an outlaw, their property seized, and any person who killed them rewarded by the state. Sulla had marched his army into Rome, the first general in history to do so, after years of civil war, and had himself appointed dictator. The proscription lists began with political enemies, then expanded to creditors, rivals, and men whose property Sulla's allies simply wanted. The proscription lists were not just political, they were a business model. An estimated 1,500 members of the Roman elite were formally proscribed. The actual dead was certainly far higher. Rome became a city of informants overnight. Slaves reported masters for freedom. Sons reported fathers for inheritance. Debtors reported creditors because a proscribed man's debts died with him. The entire incentive structure of Roman social life was inverted in weeks. Heads were displayed on the speaker's platform in the forum, where politicians had given speeches. Property was auctioned to Sulla's allies for fractions of its value. One of those buyers was a young man named Marcus Crassus, who used those auctions to begin building the fortune that made him the wealthiest man in Rome. Sulla reformed the constitution, then resigned the dictatorship and retired to his estate. He died the following year of natural causes, which for a man who had made that many enemies was itself remarkable. Julius Caesar watched the proscriptions as a young man. When he crossed the Rubicon decades later, he crossed it knowing exactly what precedent existed, that the machinery of the state could be turned against the citizens it was built to protect. The assassination of Julius Caesar. On the 15th of March, 44 BC, Julius Caesar was stabbed 23 times by approximately 60 senators who called themselves the Liberators, men who believed they were saving the Roman Republic. They were wrong about almost everything that followed. Caesar had just been named dictator in perpetuity. The conspiracy involved roughly 60 senators who met in secret and wrote nothing down. At its center was Marcus Brutus, symbolically essential, reportedly descended from the man who expelled Rome's last king 500 years earlier. If Brutus was part of it, it was republican virtue, not a power grab. That, at least, was the story they told themselves. The Senate meeting on the Ides of March was scheduled as routine. What happened inside it took less than 5 minutes. A senator named Cimber approached Caesar with a petition and grabbed his toga. The conspirators closed in. The first blow came from behind, a glancing wound to the neck. Caesar grabbed the blade and cut his own hand. He looked up and saw the faces around him. When he saw Brutus among them, he stopped struggling, pulled his toga over his face, and let the blows come. 23 stab wounds. Later examination found only one had been fatal. The others were so numerous and the conspirators so crowded around Caesar that several senators stabbed each other by accident. Caesar fell at the base of a statue of Pompey, the rival he had defeated in civil war, and bled to death at Pompey's feet. The conspirators walked into the streets with bloodied blades raised, shouting that tyranny was dead. The streets were empty. Every Roman in the vicinity had fled. Mark Antony read Caesar's will publicly. Gardens left to the people, cash to every citizen. When he displayed the bloodied toga at the funeral, the crowd rioted, and the conspirators fled Rome within days. The assassination triggered 13 more years of civil war and ended in the permanent death of the very republic the conspirators killed Caesar to save. The most instructive political miscalculation in history, they correctly identified the problem and catastrophically misunderstood the solution. The reign of Caligula. When Caligula became emperor in 37 AD, Rome celebrated. His father, Germanicus, had been one of the most beloved generals in the empire. Caligula was 24, and Rome read his long silence under Tiberius as patience and virtue. It was neither. The first 7 months were almost normal. Exiles recalled, secret files burned, money distributed. Then, in autumn 37 AD, Caligula fell severely ill. 3 separate historians, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, and Seneca, all writing within living memory of the reign, all described the same transformation when he recovered. He forced families of condemned men to watch executions, then join him for dinner immediately after. He had a man sawn in half at a public event because the noise of the flogging disturbed his concentration. He made senators run alongside his litter for miles in their formal togas. He had a man thrown to wild animals, and when the screaming annoyed him, had the man's tongue removed first. He declared himself a living god and charged worshippers admission to his temple. He made his horse a consul, either genuine psychosis or a calculated insult to the Senate designed to show them exactly what he thought of their institution. He had men killed for looking at him. He had a man killed, reportedly, for mentioning a goat. On January 24th, 41 AD, Caligula was stabbed 30 times by his own Praetorian Guard. He was 28. His wife and infant daughter were murdered the same day. Caligula's reign is not a story about one disturbed man. It is a demonstration of what absolute power produces when nothing is left to restrain it. He did not create a broken system. He simply revealed the one that was already there. The Great Fire and Nero's persecution of Christians. On the night of July 18th, 64 AD, fire broke out near the Circus Maximus and burned for 9 days. When it was over, 3 of Rome's 14 districts were completely destroyed. And what Nero did with the aftermath was worse than the fire itself. Nero returned from his villa, organized relief, and opened his own gardens to the displaced. Even the hostile historian Tacitus acknowledges this. But among survivors living in emergency camps, a rumor spread that Nero had watched from a tower, playing his lyre, while Rome burned. Nero understood the rumor was believed. He needed a different name attached to the blame. What Nero did next was not the act of a man trying to prove his innocence. It was the act of a man who needed a different name on the blame. Nero blamed the Christians. It was a logical choice. They were a small, misunderstood minority with no powerful protectors, widely rumored to practice strange rituals, openly speaking of the world's end. What followed was documented by Tacitus in terms that remain difficult to read across 2,000 years. Christians were arrested, tortured into naming others, then killed for public entertainment. Some were dressed in animal skins and torn apart by dogs in the arena. Some were crucified. Some were coated in pitch and set on fire, used as human torches to illuminate Nero's gardens at night, while Nero mingled with the crowd. Tacitus, who personally despised Christians, wrote that even those who thought the victims deserved punishment felt pity for them because it was clear they were being destroyed not for the public good, but to satisfy one man's need to redirect anger. Nero used the fire-cleared land to build the Domus Aurea, a 300-acre personal palace with a 120-foot bronze statue of himself at the entrance. Rome had burned. Nero built himself a palace on the ashes. The 64 AD persecution established that Christians could be used as political scapegoats, a precedent followed by successive emperors for 2.5 more centuries. Unconstrained power does not simply fail to protect people, it consumes them. And it does so most efficiently when it has someone else to blame. The eruption of Vesuvius and the burial of Pompeii. On the morning of August 24th, 79 AD, the city of Pompeii was doing exactly what it did every morning. Bakers were baking, wine merchants were opening their counters. The mountain above them had not erupted in over 1,000 years, and the Latin language did not even have a word for volcano. The eruption column reached 20 miles into the sky. The naturalist, Pliny the Elder, sailed toward it to observe, landed at the nearby town of Stabiae, had dinner, went to sleep, and was found dead on the beach the next morning, killed by toxic gases at age 56. His nephew watched from 18 miles away and wrote the only surviving eyewitness account of a major volcanic eruption in all of ancient history. What happened in Pompeii over the next 18 hours was not a disaster. It was an erasure. Pumice rained on the city for hours, burying streets waist-deep. Roofs collapsed. Then, in the early hours of August 25th, the eruption column itself collapsed. A pyroclastic surge, superheated gas, and volcanic matter at 300 degrees Celsius, moving at over 100 miles per hour, reached Pompeii and killed everyone still alive in approximately 17 minutes. The deaths were instantaneous. What remained were the outlines of human beings preserved in hardened ash in the exact positions of their final moments. A mother curled around a child, a man with his cloak pressed to his face, a chained dog that had tried to climb above the rising pumice. 2,000 people stopped mid-breath. Emperor Titus organized regional relief efforts. Pompeii itself was not rebuilt. Within 2 generations, the precise location of the city was forgotten entirely. When Pompeii was rediscovered 1,700 years later, it offered something history had never provided before: a single Roman moment, perfectly frozen. Bread in the ovens, love declarations on the walls, people who died 2,000 years ago feeling unsettlingly close. The sack of Rome by the Visigoths. In 410 AD, Rome was sacked for the first time in 800 years. The people living there did not believe it was possible, and that belief was not arrogance. It was 800 years of unbroken historical evidence. The Visigoth king Alaric had spent years seeking a negotiated settlement, land, a military title, pay for his soldiers. He had served in the Roman army. He understood Roman politics. He besieged Rome twice, accepted payment to withdraw both times. The Western court kept delaying, negotiating, and ultimately refusing. The third time, in August 410 AD, Alaric did not withdraw. The gates of Rome had held for 800 years. On the night of August 24th, someone inside the city opened them. The Salarian Gate was opened from the inside, ancient sources suggest by slaves, on the night of August 24th, 410 AD. The Visigoths entered the city and remained for 3 days. By the standards of ancient warfare, the sack was relatively restrained. Alaric had issued orders against killing and against desecrating Christian churches, and his forces largely obeyed. Those who took refuge in the Basilica of St. Peter were left unharmed. But the looting was thorough. Centuries of accumulated imperial wealth, gold and silver stripped from conquered nations, spoils of 1,000 wars, were carried out over 3 days. The Senate, the aristocracy, families who had defined Roman society for generations were stripped of everything overnight and became refugees in their own city. Saint Jerome wrote from his monastery, "The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken." Saint Augustine began writing The City of God in direct response, a book he spent 13 years completing. Rome was sacked again in 455 AD. The Western Empire formally ended in 476 AD. The sack of 410 was not the end, but it was the moment the idea of Rome became mortal. The moment an entire civilization confronted the fact that nothing built by human hands is truly permanent. Rome did not fall because it was weak. It fell because for centuries, it confused power with strength. They are not the same thing. Every event in this video, the crosses on the Appian Way, the proscription lists, the bloodied toga in the Forum, the torchlit gardens, the ash-frozen bodies of Pompeii, none of them were accidents. They were the system working exactly as designed. That is what makes Rome unsettling. Not that it collapsed, but that it lasted as long as it did, and that the things which eventually broke it were not enemies from outside. They were decisions made from inside, repeated so many times they became invisible.